if we're not scanning everything and you don't want to scan everything, even if you could scan everything, how could you make the claim that you are getting any more secure? How do you know? You might be just wasting a bunch of time.
It's stressful to go it alone out there. You found CISO Stressed, brought to you by SCYTHE. I'm your host, Liz Wharton, lawyer Liz, chief of staff at SCYTHE. And with CISO Stressed, we're a conversation bi-weekly with different CISOs and executives and discussing the issues that are top of mind and kind of tip of tongue. So with that, glad you could join us. Find past episodes, future episodes on SCYTHE's YouTube channel, as well as Apple Podcasts, or wherever you stream and listen to your podcasts. So with that, we've brought in this week a veteran of the industry, but also when we talk about stress these days, I mean, we've had confirmation that even our printers are truly out to get us, and identifying different assets and inventory. I mean, if it is what helped cause issues with Colonial Pipeline, those undiscovered and forgotten assets, then who better to speak with than our guest this week, Robert Hansen. And so he'll be joining us. And, Robert, we started discussing some of these issues with assets, like how many years? I mean, and when I say you have been there, done that, and have the multiple T-shirts and stuff, it's putting it mildly. I mean, you've been running and advising companies for how many years now?
Just about 27 now.
So, welcome. Thanks for sharing. Is it safe to say it's hard to shock you? Is it the same stuff you see every, like, oh, look, we're having this vulnerability again?
Yeah, in fact, there's a handful of us who've kind of had this thing going for a while now. Like, name the last vulnerability that really not just shocked you, but we did not have a defense for it. Like we couldn't have done something to stop it. And I'll be honest, I can't remember. It's probably been a good 10 years since there's been something I'm like, wow, that's truly innovative. We're going to have to architecturally rethink things, not just like patch or put a firewall in front of it or whatever. So yeah, I don't really get surprised anymore. But it's not to say I don't learn stuff. I learn stuff all the time. There's a lot of really interesting. In fact, I think the major difference between me now and me maybe even 6 months ago is I really started analyzing what the major problems are with back to WebAppSec, because I've been kind of going to network security for a while and I'm kind of dovetailing back into WebAppSec. And I haven't really had a reason to think about the economics of the problem for a long time. So now I'm doing it with a bit of distance and a little bit more time under my belt. And I think I figured it out, and it's like 10 separate problems. But
only 10.
Well, you could say 11. I'm on the edge about the 11th, but definitely 10 problems. I'll give you an example of a couple. Like I sit in a lot of meetings with a lot of people, and once upon a time, I'd sit down with some security people at some random company, and they would know what I'm talking about. It would be a bidirectional conversation. We'd be having a good talk, and I don't know what it is, but the average abilities of the people inside these companies that I talk to has declined a lot. Like they don't seem to have the same talent per capita on average that they used to have. So that's a big problem, because it's not just that you can't train them up. You can train them up, but I think that's just going to get worse and worse and worse over time. I don't think that's going to get better over time. And if that's the case, like if you're a small company and you don't have anything interesting going on, why is a really good security person ever going to go to your company? And then you're going to have a hard time recruiting them on top of that. And then you're going to get somebody who's not very good that you're going to have to spend a lot of time and resources to train up. And meanwhile, they're doing the wrong thing. Not just, when I say these people are not very good, I don't mean like they don't quite follow everything I'm saying. I mean, they're saying wildly incorrect things that we've known to be wrong for, at least 20 years. So that's just the opposite of helpful. Like, I mean, why bother having that person on staff at all? And if that's where we're starting with, then all the subsequent problems related to automation or whatever get more dire. We need them even more, like, more quickly, and we need them to involve less people and be more self-sufficient, et cetera, and collapse the experts into choke points where we can kind of have everything flowing to them from whatever random industry and whatever boring company you happen to run, so that you don't have to worry about hiring and firing. That's all just centrally managed, because I don't see, it's not a skill shortage. I think we have more and more skills every day. I think as a per capita of companies, the skills have gotten worse on average.
Well, and it opens the door. I mean, certainly some of the things I've seen when prior to SCYTHE, working especially in city government, where it opens the door when you don't have that technical knowledge needed, that bare minimum for a position. And a vendor comes in or someone and they change a setting or they deploy a product incorrectly, or even your own people are deploying it, using it, not maximizing it. And then it's kind of like, surprise, we just, as you said, that same old issue. And you look and say, but we bought shiny object over here to fix that. Well, yeah, but if you don't take it out of the box,
if you don't know what you're doing with it, and that's the problem. Like, I'll tell people, like, here's how you do it, and they're like, no, we're going to do it this way. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, you can't, it won't work.
Exactly.
Like, the internet doesn't work that way. Like, ouch.
Yeah. So how do you battle that? I mean, or how do you?
All right, we're on to number 2. All right.
Oh, there you go. Oh, I like this.
So the second problem is that no one knows what they own. So this is where bit discovery comes into play. But it's kind of worse than that. People seem to be kind of uninterested in knowing what they own because they feel like it's going to introduce more work. It's like, well, I already have so much work. I don't want to know more of things that are wrong because I've already got all this stuff going on. It's like, yes, but how do you know what to focus on? Because you don't know what's out there. Like, you could be working on all this stuff down here, but really there's some really, really terrible stuff that you should be focused on way first, or whatever. Or it might be very easy to fix, but you just aren't even looking at it, so you don't even know to do that. And so, but they're kind of like weirdly arrogant about it. Like, well, we know what we need to know. It's like, no, you don't. You can't even begin to make that claim because you don't know what you don't know. So it's a very awkward, weird conversation. And then we'll also have similar kinds of things. Like, people will say, like, XYZ is out of policy, so we don't have that. I'm like, okay, great. Well, let's take a look. Oh, here it is. You have it. And they're like, no, but it's out of policy. I'm like, I know, but you have it. So it kind of doesn't matter if it's out of policy or not. It's sitting right there. And they're like, nope. Like, they're just, and the conversation never goes any further than that. And I just like, how did you get this job? It's very shocking. Very shocking.
And that, when you give them that look of utter disbelief, and I'd say this is where I would have my teacup and just start sipping. Really. But that doesn't protect. And when you think about the companies that we're talking about, that, yeah, they're boring, but maybe they're providing a critical service, or someone somewhere is relying on them.
Yeah.
And that's not a sufficient answer. That, and when you're talking about policies, what do you mean? So when you're saying it's out of policy, just to clarify, kind of level set, insurance policy, internal policies, contract policies, all of the above.
Can you hear this? Should we stop? Oh, good. Oh, good. Excellent. It's definitely going off. Okay. So, no, I agree.
At least you expected it.
Yeah, right.
And we will absolutely note to self, like, this is the part we'll cut.
If you can't hear it, then we could just keep going, because it doesn't actually bother me very much. But I just want to make sure you're okay with it.
Yeah.
All right. I'll just keep going then.
Just keep going. Yeah.
So I really like the idea of having a standardized policy. It's something the industry never got around to doing. But you know how we have like OWASP top 10 and we have like the WASP threat classification and all this stuff?
Mhm.
We really should have the idea of a standardized set of policies, open source, that like lots of companies contribute to. Like, well, if you need this type of compliance, then you have to turn on these handful of
Mhm.
compliancy documents or whatever. But like, I think we spend probably close to $1 billion a year with consultants, high value consultants that are just basically cutting and pasting. There's no reason for that. And they're doing it wrong. If I've actually walked into some very large companies and their policies are like, and I'm not joking here, they're from the 90s. And the
Mhm.
problem is that security has changed a lot in 20, 30 years. You know what I mean? And I know for a fact that a lot of those policies are actually counterproductive. And I'm like,
Mhm.
well, if you just had some centralized company out there, call it a nonprofit, that just
Mhm.
handled this problem for everybody, it's like, well, these policies are out of date, and we now know things, and let's change them. And you don't have to ratify them in your company. You can take a look at them and say, oh, I'll take the best of the parts I like and remove the rest. But for most companies, I think they just say yes. Like, okay, great. Someone's dealing with this for me. I'll handle it and just click the buttons. These are the 5 things. Here's the name of my company. Here's my
Mhm.
geography. The couple of variables you have to know, and then boom, there's your policies and procedures. And so I
Yeah, as
think
I
there's
say,
room to
that's one
improve
of
that
the
too.
dirty secrets of the legal world as well. With a lot of contracts and stuff, I'll find I'm like, wow, you just cut and pasted this
Mhm.
uh, without any attention to what our actual process is. My personal favorite is when you find 3 different policies covering the exact same thing,
Mhm.
but big gaping holes in other stuff. So, yeah,
Exactly.
I
Yep.
like having a more centralized of going, as long as you've adopted and kind of like the menu, no, you've already ordered the crust of your pizza. You need to move on to the sauce now.
Mhm.
Okay, now you've picked whether you want sauce, no sauce. Like, I like that.
Yeah. I think it's a very simple idea. It wouldn't be very difficult to do. And people like yourselves who have expertise could look at it. Occasionally, you'll get a copy of
Mhm.
it and you're like, ooh, no, there's this, you didn't know about this one thing. And then everyone gets the benefit of your knowledge without having to spend the dollars necessary to hire every good lawyer who would ever have some minor input into this global thing, right?
Yeah.
And it would be very easy to localize it to different languages and so on and so on. So, yeah, I love the idea. Just it's one of those like long down the list of things I need to go tackle at some point with somebody
In your
um,
free time.
in my copious free time. Yes, of course.
Mhm.
Yeah. So back to the number 3 problem, because I think this is all kind of related. Um, if let's say somehow we know what everybody owns, let's say that's magically done through bit discovery
Mhm.
or whatever means. Let's say you happen to really be good at it and you know by yourself. People don't want to scan everything. We get in this conversation like, oh, well, yeah, but that would be expensive. We get way
Mhm.
more vulns. We don't want more vulns. We want less vulns. How do we get less
Mhm.
vulns? And so, and even if we wanted to scan everything, the scanning companies can't. Their infrastructure cannot handle scanning every single website on the planet. They just can't.
Mhm.
And when we look at them and we ask them, like, well, what would if we gave you 100,000 assets to go scan one company? Let's say you have 100,000 assets. That's an order of magnitude more than all of their customers combined. Like they just couldn't. They'd have to design new architecture to take on even one client that decided to scan everything. And so if we're not scanning everything and you don't want to scan everything, even if you could scan everything, how could you make the claim that you are getting any more secure? How do you know? You might be
Mhm.
just wasting a bunch of time on stuff that just truly doesn't matter. And prioritization is all wrong. Like people are saying, like high, medium, low, like stoplights. Like this is
Mhm.
bad. It's critical or whatever. So how do you know it's critical? Based on what? Based on another asset or based just purely on itself, because that's not very useful information. Like if it's a critical vulnerability in something that's sitting in a basement somewhere that's not connected to anything, who cares? Like it's not, you can't pivot to anything. It's not in behind the firewall. It's just sort of sitting there. that is not a critical vulnerability. Your losses are going to be zero, or next to zero anyway. Even if the worst thing possible could happen on that box, it's still nothing compared to, let's say, a medium level vuln, whatever that means, on your homepage, let's say.
Mhm.
So prioritization's a disaster, like truly a disaster.
Well, and it changes.
Yep,
I mean,
that's
or at least it should.
yeah, agreed.
Depending on the week, the day, I mean, even the cert alerts, like, constantly getting
Mhm.
like, oh, wait, we found something else.
Mhm.
Nope, nope, just kidding. That thing we told you was really important. Yeah, don't do that.
Yep.
That's been a kind of only because I'm not responsible for the fixes. It becomes fun to watch some of them coming in going, like, again, with the tea or the popcorn, like,
Mhm.
oh, okay, that one was bad. Oh, well, good thing we didn't like, yeah. Just imagining the IR teams and the blue teams weekends just getting shot, going, well, fudge, like
Mhm.
that. So,
And you're absolutely right. It should change. Let's say one day you're sitting there, it's kind of like a medium level vuln, not very interesting, and it's kind of expensive to fix, so you kind of don't want to fix it, and because the chances are unlikely that anyone
yeah,
will ever find it. And then the next day, anonymous hates your guts for some reason, and everyone's attacking you, and they're going to find that vuln and they're going to go after it as hard as they possibly can. So the risk went wildly way up in just one day, or maybe even a few minutes. Or let's say you're like, hey, let's put this thing behind a WAF. Well, the vuln's still there. What are the chances
mhm,
of someone's going to do WAF evasion to get to that vuln to do the exploit? It's like, well, the likelihood went way down, but the exploit's still the same.
yeah,
The amount of bad things you could do is identical, but the likelihood has gone way, way, way down. So yeah, all kinds of stuff like that. This prioritization is an absolute disaster, and really prioritization should be based on money, which is one
mhm,
thing that I still can't believe our industry hasn't figured this out yet. It shouldn't be based on high, medium. It shouldn't be a stoplight. It shouldn't be high, medium, low. It should be, well, we think this thing's going to lose you about $5 million because of what we know about
mhm,
this asset and likelihood, and it'll cost about $100,000 to fix. So you divide those numbers into one another, and it comes up with the score. And everything that scores high, you fix. Everything down to literally the number one, and anything below number one, you just don't. This doesn't make sense. It's more expensive to
yeah,
fix than it's worth to you. That's how the insurance companies are thinking. So I can't figure out why security companies haven't figured this out yet. But um, and then, so let's say I get like some massive vulnerabilities, like this huge, enormous vulnerability, because I'm scanning everything now. It's all
mhm,
prioritized properly, let's say, for the first time. Um, I can't handle that. Like I went from 1,000 vulns before, and now I have 10,000 or whatever. Yes, they're
mhm,
prioritized, but there's still 10,000 vulns to look through, and like I'm not
yeah,
going to do that. Even if it's prioritized, I'm still not going to do it. I might make it to the whatever my team can manage to go through. But remember, my team has gotten significantly worse over the years, not
yeah,
better. So this is like way more dangerous to have them going off and doing whatever they're doing before, because they're less and less qualified over time per capita. Um, and I think there's a lot of brain drain too. A lot of like the really good people are leaving the industry for some reason, and that's even worse. Going to other places like insurance, for example, we've lost a lot of people. Like all the binary edge people went over there, for instance, to
mhm,
Coalition. But anyway, so we need WAFs. We need WAFs to work, and we need them to work automatically. Not like auto patching in the sense that it just figures out what to do, but in the sense where a centralized group of people manage these WAF rules, and you don't think about it, and they just automatically get fixed. And so the only vulns that would be left are things that are super weird custom business logic stuff that like it would break your like eBay needs cross-site scripting to exist, otherwise you can't put auctions up. So
mhm,
obviously they're not going to block that, otherwise all auctions go away. But they they can block, let's say, a SQL injection or something. That's easy. And so you're left only with the business logic stuff, which is the complicated, critical to your business, core to the way your site works type stuff, which is a much smaller set of issues. That's going to be like less than a tenth of the issues. So you're
mhm,
back to 1,000 vulns, but now they're properly prioritized. So maybe only 500 are worth fixing, which is less than you started with. And you're way, 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 way more secure. And then you need insurance to basically ensure that this design will work, because the problem is no CISO is going to say, yeah, cool, I'm going to put my job on the line with this concept. They're just not going to do it. Not if they're smart, anyway. What they should do is say, okay, I'll believe you if you warranty it and insure the downside. So if the bad thing
Mhm.
happens, you're putting your own money on the line, not my money on the line, and that I'll trust you because then all the incentives are aligned, and it makes sense that you would lose your money if you messed up somewhere along the line. And then lastly, we need to stop stuff that just doesn't work, like SAST. SAST really should not be used at all unless it's like unless it's an app where a lot of people have access to the source code or something, because we've done a lot of analysis over the years and it finds less than 1% of the same issues that DAST does. 1%, like it just seems crazy to me to spend time and money on something that is super unlikely to find anything that's useful.
Mhm.
It's a little different if you were like running WordPress and everyone has access to WordPress code because it's commercial off the shelf, whatever, open source code. But if it's just some tiny little app that you built internally and no one's ever going to have access to source code, but you and your team, and nothing particularly critical is going on there, like I just can't see spending more money on things with a wildly large amount of false positives, but B just not finding things that matter.
Yeah.
Not that the attackers are actually using anyway. So that's the one I'm a little iffy on. That's the 11th. So anyway, a lot of problems.
Yeah. Well, and so when you think about that, and I know NTIA just released their SBOM, guidance on their latest executive order and stuff. Do you think solutions like that are going to get us even closer when we talk about some of these apps that you've developed internally? So having that bill of materials available that the users could see
Mhm.
will help. I mean, because I don't
Oh
think that
yeah,
covers the other problem. I mean, that
I think
gets.
it'll help though. Everything
Mhm.
helps a little bit, but what I'd be wary of is spending a lot of time chasing down any individual aspect of every single thing that is made everywhere in the world when you already have a lot of really serious issues that are sitting right there that are much more likely to be directly attacked. Um, it's not to say that supply chain management, oof, I mean, this is a big ball of wax. So
Mhm.
it's not to say that supply chain management isn't a problem. It certainly is, especially when you're talking about code dependency issues. That is a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. Um, but it helps if you have a good inventory, because at least then you could say, look, where is all the stuff that uses anything that we can spot publicly that has XYZ, some old version of jQuery or whatever that we know is backdoored or
Mhm.
something. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But I wouldn't personally, if I was a CISO, I wouldn't spend a ton of time doing that type of analysis unless you know it's truly vulnerable. If you know it's vulnerable, yeah, absolutely go after it. Yeah, assuming it's prioritized properly, assuming it's not on some site that doesn't matter. This is all back to that prioritization problem. I think you can prioritize everything. You could prioritize, Navy SEALs breaking into a nuclear submarine on the same graph as you could, someone getting a paper cut because you're leaving the paper out, right? It's all the
Mhm.
same graph of risk. It's just that a lot of those risks are very unlikely or very low damage. And when you get to that distribution of the curve where those things are true, or it's very complicated to fix, like Heartbleed, or sorry, not Heartbleed, that was easy to fix. The one where you could extrapolate information out of memory. I'm spacing on the name of it. Rowhammer. Rowhammer is a particularly pernicious issue if you don't basically do forklift upgrade of RAM from normal RAM to error correcting memory. And you can look at that and say, well, that's a pretty bad vuln, being able to read out of memory. That's pretty nasty. What are the
Mhm.
chances my cell phone is going to have Rowhammer attacking it? And then what is the cost of fixing my cell phone or every cell phone in the company? Is maybe got 1,000 people working in our company. It's $100 each, or at least
Mhm.
for a low end phone that might have error correcting memory or something. It's enormously expensive for a very unlikely attack. So I don't think people like this. I don't people like the idea of leaving vulns alone and pretending like they don't matter. But insurance companies know they don't matter. There's only a certain amount of vulns that actually lead to real business loss, and they tend to be things like, do you have a VPN that's publicly accessible? Do you have RDP that's publicly accessible? SSH that's publicly accessible? Because they're going to do brute force on that stuff and try to break in. Well, then you better have second factor authentication on them, et cetera, et cetera. And
I was going to say, paging Colonial Pipeline, know where those outlier, assets and inventory is and track it.
Yep. And ideally have backups. One of the funny things I heard about them is they did have backups, but it would take too long to do the backup. But that should be something that's built in their risk model. Like, well, we need a faster way to back up. Try it. Try it one day. Try it to see what it would take. Oh, it would take a week. We're going to be down for a week. Does that sound good from a business perspective?
Right. And I mean, those are the kinds of things we harped on the show before, having a plan, but knowing the plan and knowing the implications of, is it going to take a week? Well, then maybe this isn't the best plan. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it's a tricky one because a lot of people, they're like, I don't have time to even do the stuff I'm currently doing. Why would I spend a whole bunch of time war gaming out the worst case scenario? Why don't I just fix the things I know that are wrong so the worst case scenario thing doesn't happen? Unfortunately, things like ransomware in general kind of proves that is the wrong way to think about things. You have to spend some amount of time doing some sort of disaster recovery planning and wargaming it, actually trying it out. Because worst case scenario, yeah, it's something really bad like, a crypto locker type thing, or best case scenario, it's your own team doing something dumb. Yeah. And which is way more likely actually on average. And so if you don't have a plan, someone accidentally removes all your backups, and I've actually had issues where multiple air conditionings failed, and it caused overheating and caused all the drives and the backup drives to all fail as a result of multiple overheating. It was basically like a big, like almost a nuclear meltdown. And so, yeah, we had backups, but we didn't have them off site, which we totally should have.
I'm only laughing because at the Atlanta airport, we went through the issue with our generator, and we're like, well, we had power. We had a failure. Power went out, fire at one of the substations. The redundancies and the backups were basically in the same space.
Yep.
So they now have generators and this massive plan, but it was like, didn't think this through, did we? So, well, and so one of the things with CISO Stressed is stressed is desserts spelled backwards, and desserts being a way to basically cap off a good meal. So what's something you do? It could be a dessert, but to cap off a good day, a bad day, what is what is one of the desserts you leverage?
Well, I'll watch really super trashy TV, specifically stuff like 60 days in or something, 60 days locked up 60 days. I forget what it is, but that I can't, there's only a handful of TV shows that are like that I cannot believe they actually were able to make them. That one, Whale Wars and Amish Mafia. I'm like, how did you
Amish Mafia?
It is crazy. It's an actual thing. It's a Amish group of people who walk around beating people with bats, and it's amazing show. And you can actually look up their arrest records. This is all real, or real enough.
Shut the front door.
Oh, okay. It's amazing. But I love it because it's real, and you can't believe they made it. And these people are really putting themselves in actual danger, and the craziest things happen. And you're just like, every one of these people are idiots, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful. I learned a lot about human behavior. And then I drink myself to sleep. It's one of those. I mean, it's not that bad. Don't worry. But yeah, I definitely have to take myself down a notch at the end of the day. Otherwise, my brain just keeps spinning, and I gotta, kind of take it down.
Well, you spend all day problem solving. The problems haven't gone away. And, just because it's 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, midnight, whatever. So absolutely. Well, and so Robert, where are some of the places folks can find more of your insights? And I mean, because you're not shy about sharing thoughts, papers, presentations, et cetera. So where can folks find more of your work?
Yeah, so at RSnake on Twitter. I post a little on LinkedIn. I post more stuff on the blog these days on bitdiscovery.com's blog. And then I'll be at Black Hat. I'm actually on the CISO selection committee for Black Hat. So if any of you CISOs are out there, want to hang out or just talk or whatever, happy to chat. But also, happy to field questions directly if someone has anything they want to chat about. I find that there's not many people who can have serious conversations about security. They kind of always like dovetail into total nonsense about culture or the what's going on with the latest trends or whatever. I'm like, that's not what's really happening. What's really happening is we're getting hacked. How do we get in front of this problem? So it's really nice to have real conversations. And so if someone wants to have those with me, more than happy to field them directly. So you can email me, robert@bitdiscovery.com.
Well, thank you. And you've been listening to CISO Stressed, brought to you by SCYTHE. Check out SCYTHE's YouTube channel. I'm your host, Liz Wharton, at Lawyer Liz on Twitter. Find me as well. And thanks again for sharing the 10 asterisks /11 problems, because you've certainly hit the nail on the head several times, and appreciate sharing.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Liz.
No, thank you.